And we are back today with Adolfo Brasino, a landlord-tenant mediation supervisor with the City of Winston-Salem, and Chantel McClam, who is a neighborhood services director for the City of Winston-Salem. They are answering your questions, so feel free to send them in. Chantel, I would like to start this next segment with you. What would you say is the biggest misconception that you hear in your office with regards to renting, ownership, or something similar?
I would say the biggest misconception is that we can allow them to not pay their rent until repairs get made, or we should be able to force landlords or property management to fix the issues quickly. All that we can do for them is when a complaint is issued is actually just address it, send an inspector out and cite accordingly. And then the process, we just have to go through the process.
Adolfo, what would you say is a misconception that you hear in your specific area?
Ms. McClam took the words out of my mouth. The biggest misconception that we have to deal with is that tenants believe that they can withhold rent as long as the repairs are not being made, that they can choose not to pay the rent, and that is just not the case, unfortunately. If we tell them that they are supposed to still pay the rent, even if there are issues with the unit.
Obviously, during the pandemic, there was a pause on evictions for all sorts of reasons. Now that has been allowed again, Chantel, would you say that evictions are still pervasive, or is this something that has settled down?
I think it's still a concern. It's still a big issue. There's still a problem with employment since COVID, and so there's still many citizens that are having issues paying their rent, and so I think that it's still a prevailing issue in the city of Winston-Salem.
Going back to what we were talking about before, Adolfo, what happens if you decide, you know, my landlord isn't fixing something that I want fixed, so I'm just going to withhold rent? What is the process that a tenant can expect to see if they decide to make that mistake?
What we try to tell tenants is that please do not do that. Please pay your rent, because if you do not pay your rent, you could be evicted. I mean, they could be evicted regardless the conditions of the unit. And what we also try to tell tenants is that if they are taken to court, remember that once they go to court for even if they attempt to evict them and the eviction never takes place, that record still appears in court, and to my knowledge, there's no way to expunge that record. And that record could hinder their possibility of renting again. Is not a short thing. Doesn't mean it's not the end of the world. It doesn't, right? But it can, if the landlords check the records in the courthouse, that may be an obstacle for them to rent again. So we always try to tell them, try to avoid going to court. Pay the rent, and let's try to deal with these repairs in a different way. But if they decide that they still want to go to court we typically refer them to legal aid. We cannot refer them to any other service, legal service that is not legal aid. So we typically refer them to legal aid, and I think in the legal aid will explain them that they have an option to ask for damages. I think up to $10,000. If and of course there is something called rent abatement. The courts or the magistrate can actually tell the tenant, it's okay, you don't have to pay your rent until the conditions are fixed. But I think the tenant would have to pay the rent in the courthouse. But anyway, we try to explain a little bit of that process to the tenants. But the exhortation is always, please, at least understand that you're supposed to pay the rent regardless the conditions of the unit.
Chantel, we've reported over the past couple of months about supply and demand issues when it comes to rental units and just property values going up. Have you seen a lot of rent increases lately? or heard about it?
Well, we haven't. We wouldn't hear about them in our department. They don't. Tenants typically don't call us to complain about the rent. It's typically repairs and issues with getting repairs complete.
Someone's wondering, they text us a question wondering, what's the law on returning deposits, and what do we do if we have not received that deposit in the quoted time frame? Chantel.
If I may.
It looks like Adolfo might have an answer there.
If I may, yeah. Chapter 42 of the North Carolina General Statute says that a landlord has 30 days after the end of the tenancy to return the deposit. So that's the general answer. That they have 30 days after the end of the tenancy. And it's very important that the tenant returns the keys, because as long as they are in possession of the keys, they could be technically still in possession of the unit. And we also try to explain that to tenants. Sometimes tenants say, oh yeah, I vacated 3 weeks ago, but I surrendered the keys yesterday. And we tell them, well, yeah, probably the end of your tenancy will start counting yesterday and not three weeks ago.
But as far as what you can do, I mean, what should you do if you haven't received that deposit back or you haven't heard anything about it?
What we will do is call the landlord and try to get the deposit back from the landlord. But it's been 30 days or 60 days and nothing has happened. Probably you have to go to court if you want to still press the issue with the landlord.
Okay, 2 segments down, 1 more to go. Chantel, Adolfo, I appreciate you being here. We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.